Okay, my name is Dean Whale. I'm with the city of Bismarck in Bismarck, North Dakota. I've been with the Industrial Pretreatment program going on 15, 16 years. This is actually my first presentation that's not on grease control or inspecting grease traps and amalgam separators and stuff. So I took a little step out into the regulatory part of it. So I may have some oopsies along the way. Bill Geffro is my supervisor. I'm the technician. Bill's the program manager. He's going to be giving a little bit of comment because this industry has been with the city of Bismarck since the beginning of time. And I'm just going to defer to him. I want to make a shout out to Sarah Ward because she was talking about some of the regulations. And I thought, oh no, she's going to.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, okay. I thought she was going to take away all my thunder, but she didn't. So, as Adam said, you know, we're here to help each other. And when we were planning this committee, this presentation, this conference, I said, let's look at some industrial users that not everybody has. Let's look at some significant industrial users that not everybody has. And so keep that in the back of your mind. Not everybody has a slaughterhouse. Not everybody has a bottling company. Not everybody has an industrial laundry. And so if you've got something in your program that not everybody has, maybe you should be doing a presentation on that, because if we've got a potato manufacturer coming to our community, we want to know what does your program do, and what are the things that you look at. And so that's kind of where we're going to go. I'd like to see that in the future. So I titled this Industrial Laundries 7218, how it relates to CFR 403. I really struggled with what to call it because I didn't want to say, well, who cares about an industrial laundry? I didn't think that sounded very technical. But maybe you'll figure that it is something you need to worry about. Not all significant industrial users are created equal. And the goal of my presentation is to kind of lay out the logic that we used on this SIU, and so it'll help you to look at what your program does with your industrial users. So I'm going to kind of refer to this as significant industrial user Anytown, USA, not necessarily significant industrial user Bismarck, North Dakota. I took a slide from Al's presentation, hoping he was here. He'd say, hey, you're using my presentation. But 403 talks about all this stuff, and I'm just going to touch on some of them as it relates to industrial laundry. A little disclaimer. Like I said, we've been monitoring, as far as I can tell, from 1991. It might be later than that, but I've only been with the city of Bismarck from 2006 on. So I try not to talk too much about things that I wasn't there for. This industrial user has always been cooperative. And they actually asked us to write them up for an NOV because that was going to help them to go to their headquarters and say, hey, we need to improve treatment. They were a little hesitant when I asked if I could use them as an example, and I've made pretty much as much efforts as I can to keep their name concealed. If for some reason I missed it, I noticed that there's one place where it says it on the top of the gray out. I apologize for that if you guys see that. And like I said, Bill's going to have some input, and I'll call on him. So a little bit about the Bismarck wastewater treatment plant. Our design capacity is 9.3 MGD. You can read it. The loading, CBOD loading. We do our biosolids and land application. You can see the Missouri River, I think, along the upper part of the slide. Here's the treatment plant. And I just did a quick search. The Missouri River gets its flow from the Garrison Dam. So Delron, that's where we were fishing. The Garrison Dam releases about, today, 13,600 CFS, which is about 6.5 million gallons per minute. We got 6.5 million gallons per day. So you can see we've got a huge receiving stream I would imagine some of you would love to have a receiving stream similar to what we have. We use trickle filters, and of course this is side, well, it'll play. It should play when I turn it. There it goes. So this is a trickling filter. Show of hands, how many of people in this presentation do not actually work at the wastewater treatment plant? So there's actually quite a few people. And it's something you should understand is how your treatment plant works. This is a play. There you go. This is what the trickling filter looks like underneath a microscope. So that trickling filter arm circulates around and it distributes the water onto a media bed that's got a slime layer growing. And that bacteria, or those microorganisms, they consume the nutrients, and that's what that gets most of our BOD removal out. And then along with that, we have our pretreatment ordinance, like all of you guys have. And we have our pretreatment limits, you know, our basic oil and grease and pH. And, you know, I don't expect you to read all of this verbatim, but, you know, as I'm sure all of you guys have in your ordinances, BTEX limits, oil and grease limits, your narrative limits, your numerical limits. Well, why is this relevant? Okay, here's my lame joke. Not relevant, not elephant relevant. Well, it's relevant because you need to know how your treatment plant works, how your discharge permit is written, what your ordinances are, because that helps you when you do your permitting for your industrial user, because it all comes back to that. So how does it relate to 403? Talking about the 25,000 gallons per day or more. Of course, we all know that. And the 5% loading and all the other categories. But if you don't know how many million gallons of water your treatment plant gets a day, you don't know where you're at on the percentage and all, and your loadings and those kinds of things. Where is this? It's not advancing. Of course, you have to develop a pretreatment program as required by 403.8, which is why we're all here. I mean, if you didn't have a pretreatment program, you couldn't enforce any action on an industrial user, right? If you didn't have a city ordinance, you couldn't enforce limits on an industrial user. So you have to have that legal authority, as it was in Al's presentation. And of course, you have to do your industrial waste survey as required by 403.8 F1 and F2. I wasn't going to go that far down, but Sarah got us started on that. So let's look at an industrial user. Here's a industrial laundry, and that converts to a 7218. And this is our water billing. So this is my industrial waste survey showing that they actually use 65,000 gallons of water a day. That's water usage, not water discharge or process discharge, but it's pretty close. So of course that's greater than that 50,000 that Adam showed you, and it's greater than 25,000. So that means we have to monitor them. And here is significant industrial user, Anytown, USA. Their average flow is 0.065 million gallons, which is 1% of our flow. Their average loading is about 420 parts per million, which is about 228 pounds per day. Still, 1.26% of our loading. Their BOD, I should stand over here. Their BOD is 725. This is the 5-year average, which is about 400 pounds a day, 2.5% of our loading. And of course, we issue them a discharge permit, just like we have a discharge permit to the river, your standard boilerplate discharge permit, with their limits, including the nanophenols and their lead and coppers and cadmium, chromium. This is all out of our city ordinance and from our local limits sampling and local limits development. So things to consider. This is kind of similar to Adam's third slide or so. What activities do they do? What are they washing? What chemicals do they use? And how do they treat their discharge? And what are the results of their discharge testing? So doing your inspections, of course, we're looking at their processes, how many pounds of laundry are they washing. And this is going to come from your yearly inspections. There's a reason you're supposed to do your yearly inspections. There's a reason why your discharge permits should only last 5 years. Because if you find something of concern in your monitoring, you find something of concern in your sampling or your inspections, then you might want to include that in your discharge permit. We're looking at their chemical inventory. Of course, I'm not expecting you to look at all this stuff verbatim. But what do they use? How much do they use? How much do they have on hand? Thousands of gallons, hundreds of gallons, 30 gallons. It all makes a big difference. Slide, come on. Slide's not working. Spencer, my advancer's not advancing. So looking at their safety data sheets, looking at what the toxicity is of the chemical. Of course, you guys all have experience looking at data sheets. So this product, this Aqua Mop, is actually a chemical that they spray on the bottom of the mop heads. And it's an antibacterial product. So antibacterial product, well, what was that we were treating our wastewater with? Microorganisms. So, start doing some toxicity calculations. What's the concentration of the product? If they were to say spill 200 gallons of that product, would that affect your trickle filter? Would that affect your activated sludge plant? You got 6 million gallons of water coming in a day and they spill 200 gallons. Do the math out and say, yeah, they would kill off our plant. Plus you might want to consider a safety factor because all that flow is not going to come over the course of one day. It's going to come in the course of an hour or so. Who did that slide, that presentation on color? That color came in and went out. If they spilt a 30-gallon tote of antibacterial chemical, it's going to come in and go out in a couple hours, and that could be bad. Something like this is pretty toxic to the Ceradaphnia. Of course, I don't expect you to read that. But just be aware, you're looking at your chemical data sheets for spill control and your pH, as we talked about when we were looking at amalgam separators and line cleaners. And the ordinance said that, or the regulation said that they can't use an acid or an oxidizer. Looking at some of the chemical data sheets, they're using hydrogen peroxide. Well, those two concepts don't mash. So let's look at the products that these guys wash. They're washing mop heads and they're washing. These are overalls used in the oil fields. And of course, if you're wearing a uniform in an oil field and washing it in a washing machine, you're probably going to see some oil. Just some shop towels, some hotel towels, those kind of things. Floor mats, a lot of sand on the floor mats. These are shop towels, oilers, as they call them in the industry. They also referred in that discoloration in the wastewater presentation about inkers, or the ink rags that they use in the printing shops. So you can see how some of our presentations have kind of some overlap, so that's kind of nice. Some more towels. And then they're doing uniforms. You can see uniforms hanging up. Pants. In fact, this company does the pants and the shirts and the uniforms and the towels and the rugs that the city of Bismarck uses. So we kind of want to have a good working relationship with them. And then they use washing machines. And these are not your mom and pop washing machines or even the washing machines you find in hotels. These are big. These, and of course, this is open with hotel towels in there. Those are 250-pound totes. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them. So they're washing, 1,250 pounds of product, and they front load them. These are those shop towels. And then I want to show you behind the washing machine because this is going to be significant coming up. So the water actually discharges through these floor drains and then into the kind of the treatment area, which is kind of just a sand trap, or that's where we do our sampling. But you need to see that before you can get further on. When I get further on, this is the dryers. There's really not much to talk about in the dryers. They're just drying. It doesn't really affect the waste stream. And then these are pressers and folders. And then I like to show videos. Hopefully this would play. See if it plays. I like to video record my industrial users because it helps you to more understand how they operate. There's a guy walking around. I tried to keep people out of the screen, and then this automated folding, automated hanging. So they try to do as much hands-off as possible. Again, some of these are limited because I tried to keep personnel out of the picture. You can see I asked the industrial user how many of those totes do they have, and he had no idea. Over 5,000, he thought. So, I mean, they do a lot of washing. What did he say? 135,000 pounds a week. So that's a lot of laundry. So let's talk about a little bit about the chemical inventory. You can see there's a 1,000-gallon chemical storage. This is actually in a room that's got no floor drains, so spill containment. Here's some 55-gallon barrels. You see they're on spill containment devices, and these are in their storage area, but they have a lot of chemical. It's chemical everywhere. Another, I think that's a 1,800-gallon storage container. So let's talk about the treatment devices. So that where it discharged behind the wash machine, it actually goes through this floor drain. And there's just a screen, and that's supposed to catch, like, if any rags go through the wash machine and come out the end of it. And then it actually discharges into the back of the building. And this is a sand trap. Well, kind of a sand trap. It's 8,000 gallons, and we'll talk more about that. And then they have an oil skimmer on there. And this is kind of an old treatment. They've changed their treatment over the years. I think in about the early 2000s, they kind of removed, this is a lint screen that keeps the lint out of the water, and they have an oil skimmer on there with a hose whip, and it skims the oil off. At least it's supposed to skim the oil off. Or what should I say, they attempt to get the oil out of the water. So this is kind of a drawing. How do you like my penmanship? This is a drawing of the sand trap, and unfortunately I don't really have a good picture of it, but basically it's 8,000 gallons of water. And remember I said they use about 65,000 gallons of water a day. Going back to the inspection, they're actually only washing for about 4 hours, 3 or 4 hours in the day. So they're discharging quite a bit of water into an 8,000-gallon tank. If you do the detention time, I think it's something like 10, 15 minutes of detention time. If anybody, is Ed Lauch in here? He's not. I would venture to guess that they're not really removing any oil in the detention time of that. And it used to fill up with sand pretty quick. And they were pumping it out. Adam, are you still in here? Yeah, they were actually pumping that out quite frequently too. And I was just talking to a guy. He's got a car wash. It's one of these big drive-through car washes. He's got several of them. and they bought their own back truck. So you might want to suggest that to that company. Buy your own backpack thing. It's cheaper, right? So issues from Anytown, USA industrial user. Interference and pass-through or obstruction, numerical exceedances, narrative exceedances, failure to sample, those kind of things. Late reports. These are like, late reports and failure to sample. Well, failure to sample, I suppose, that could be bad. They might not want to be sampling for a reason, but late reportings. And sometimes what happens is you get new management in, or the guy that used to do it, he quit, and nobody told the next guy that you need to do it. So this industry had all these, and we're going to try to cover them as they in a chronological aspect. So oil and grease, I looked through their violations logbook, and Bill, if you want to talk a little bit about oil and grease, and then we'll talk a little bit about the NPE. So go ahead, Bill.
First off, thank you for giving me about an hour notice I was going to help present here. We used to have big issues with oil and grease from them. However, we decided that we didn't want to have an oil grease limit. However, we worked with them to try to keep the numbers down. Their little whip probably doesn't work very well. You're probably going to get into that 60-inch shaker? Okay.
Yeah.
Back in 1998, 99, City of Bismarck started having pass-through toxicity with fathead minnows. And one went on for about a year. We were actually doing the test ourselves. We started that in 1987 when the wet testing came out, the Pterodaphne dubia and Papaminolis, the water flea in the minnows, essentially. And we killed our minnows off consistently for years. And we weren't sure what it was. We were doing the testing ourselves, and we had a pretty much good idea where it was coming from. And we would test them, and even at a 10%, we would die off. And so back then, actually Kurt McCormick was pretty rehearsed in that. And he'd seen some other areas in Region 8 where they were having some toxicity issues. So it was kind of new on the NPE, nonylphenol ethoxylate testing. We probably spent more than $100,000 just on lab stuff trying to figure it out. And we really weren't sure, but Kurt said we were sure. And some of the work that we did, we went out and looked at our 60 largest water users where they had a lot of chemicals and usage. That involved all of our SIUs, all of our large laundry facilities, and we looked at nonylphenol ethoxylate. And everybody, it's proprietary, you can't get it, some had it, some didn't, and some was less than this. So we had a lot of work with the chemical manufacturers, we had to have it confidential, and we found out that we were receiving, of the 60 facilities, 80% of it was coming from one facility. And there was like 40 some, no, you should have gave me a notice, I had the numbers, but
Yeah.
it was been 40 some pounds a day just from this facility. And we said, well, you need to back off on it. And the chemical company, I don't know if I dare say their name.
No, you can, because I actually used it on the SDSs.
Oh, yeah, okay, but not the new one. I'll just
Oh,
buy
yeah.
half. I don't want to. So they said, well, we can reduce it maybe 25%, and that's it. Well, we had our audit. Kurt McCormick says, you already know. You need to take action. So just as soon as we took enforcement action, it says, you will stop within 2 weeks. Well, they did it within a week. And guess what? Our toxicity problem went away, and that was grateful to that, but sometimes when push comes to shove and they're violating Clean Water Act, they don't have a choice. And you don't have a choice either. You have to take action and have them move and get back into compliance with that. So,
that's what I was looking for, Bill. Thank you. Like I said, Bill's been working with them for a long time. So, failure to sample, documentation. And actually, Bill, I was looking through your notes on that. It looks like they used the wrong method for the sampling, or they exceeded holding time or something. And the NOV that we sent said basically failure to sample according to 136. Failure to submit on time, again, not really a big issue, but when you start doing SNC calculations, you want to look at that. So in 2018, we had some BTEX issues, and we'll get into that. And then we had some solids accumulations issues. So getting back to that oil and grease, so this is what the underside of that sand trap looks like. And you can see there's some oil on here. You can see there's oil up here. There's oil. This is actually where the water goes out of the sand trap, and there's oil accumulation on here. This is the inside of one of the GLS sampling bottles, and there's oil floating on the top of it. There's oil floating around here. And here's my strainer covered in oil. Now, when I first started doing restaurant inspections, one of the old-time health inspectors, because we work with other agencies within the city, he told me if you go into a restaurant, the first thing you want to look at are the light switches and the ceiling vents. Because if they're neglecting the light switches and the ceiling vents, they're neglecting a lot of other things. And if you're seeing oil on your strainer, there's probably oil going down the drain. Who asked about the oil and grease sampling? Yeah, so if you're sampling for oil and grease 3 hours after they've discharged their washing load with oil and grease, you're not going to capture oil and grease. So you have to do your sampling during the time period where they're discharging their water. And again, that comes back to understanding when you're doing your annual inspection, how are they doing their processes? When are they washing what types of loads, especially for this industrial user? Or back to Adam's presentation, when are they draining the blood? And when is that coming out? And how are they doing that? So, or when you talked about when they're doing their cleaning. If you sample when they're doing their cleaning compared to when they're doing their blood draining for a grab sample, such as pH, or the coke crushing, if they're not crushing cans, when you're sampling for pH, you're probably going to be okay. So you kind of have to understand what's going on. So this is that NOV for the failure to sampling error. Here's the NOV for reporting a late one. Not really the issues. So these are those shop towels. I don't know, can you guys read this? This is a PID meter, and it's not really coming through, but there's 54 parts PID showing up, hydrocarbons showing up, just on the from coming off the air. And I was going to point it out on the video, but on those wash machines, there's a vent that comes out, and so as they're washing with this hot water, it'll vent out. And I put this PID meter up there, and you see it pegged it out at 999 ppm. Who knows what it really was? I bet you if you took a match and lit it, it'd blow up the building. Okay, well that's air quality, right? We don't care about air quality, but if the light switches and the ceiling vents are dirty, and the air quality is bad, you might want to be considering about the water quality. So this is actually the reading in the sand trap. Now this is when they're, so what I started doing was like, hey, when you guys wash these oiler rigs, that's when I want to check. That's when I want to sample. I don't want to do it later. And so when I found that the amount of discharge in the sand trap was over 500 parts, I took a BTEX sample. And Paula Gores, are you in here? She left. I was going to mention her. So this is from MVTL, and of course you remember when I showed you our local ordinance of a 0.75 BTEX. We've got a 2.1 BTEX violation. So here's our notice of violation for their BTEX exceedance, and then this is the resampling. And so what they did was, we didn't tell them you can't wash shop towels. We said you can't discharge above 0.75. And their solution was to ship off in containers their shop towels. Of course, that was their decision, right? We didn't tell them they can't do that. And I'm going to come back to that. So let's talk about that obstruction. So this is our GIS technology that I start looking at. And this is this industry right here. And in 2009, we had or 2010, we had an obstruction from our jetting crew. And in 2018, they saw another obstruction from our jetting crew. Maybe 2020, later in the close, right? So we took action to it. This is the detailed. This is where this actually shows their name in there, so I won't go too far. So this is that line. Oops, back up. So you can see, if you can read this, this is our manhole 7M and manhole 12M and manhole 6M. The reason I put that on there is so you can see here, this is looking north. Let's play, going from that 7M to 12N, and you can see obstruction, calcification. This is after the jetting, and this is coming out of their 6-inch pipe. You can see there's some obstruction going on in there. You can see that there's obstruction on. I had to edit these movies down because otherwise it was going to be like bajillion times bigger than we had it, could allow. This is going west in 2018. Again, this is after jetting, and there's still buildup on the side of the line after the jetting, and they go in there with a cutting tool. So how many of you guys actually look at your jetting videos? And how many of you guys work with your collection staff and say, who are you having problems with? So that's important. So I get, quite often I get phone calls from the jetting staff. We get emails from the jetting staff. Have you looked at these guys? This is what we're seeing in this area. You can see buildup of lint. And I really think this is, kind of like how your non-dispersible is mixed together with your oils, the fats, oils, and grease. The oil and grease coming from this industry is mixing together with the lint, and it's coating up. But also calcification going on from the soaps that they're using. And then this is in 2020, and this is coming south, so that's why your flow is coming from the other direction than this one. And now we're going to pan over to the. Oh, they did that already. I missed that. So you can see there's the obstruction, and it really isn't much better. You can see the buildup. This is an 8-inch line. Oop. So again, NOV causing obstruction. This is the narrative violation as opposed to the numerical violation, which was the BTEX. So hey, we said you got to do something, right? And what they did was they installed this shaker screen. I didn't get a good video of it, but basically they pump the water out of the sand trap is down here, and they pump the water up into this rotary shaker screen, and it pours it in here, and then it pushes it back down. And I didn't do the treatment justice, because then they capture that sand and grit, and it reduces a lot of the soil or the solids, and that's supposedly going to help with the treatment plant or the treatment device working better. So this is part of the narrative that Bill said, and we kind of have an action plan. This is what we saw, this is what you did, and we're going to continue to televise in 2021 and 2022 because you can't really, you do something and the effects are obviously immediate. Well, not always. So we're going to re-televise in 21 and 22, and we're going to see what it looks like, see if it has improved or not, and see whether or not further actions are going to be required. Sometimes, shipping off the shop towels, that was immediate. Adam was talking about money. Industries don't like to waste money, and neither does this industry. Well, when I first went out and looked at this industry, it was kind of like a dungeon. And they brought in a new environmental engineer in there, and he really did some amazing things. And that place is pretty clean, especially in the back boiler area. And they use, can you see these temperatures? Is it 94 and 106? So they used to just use their water. They have to bring it in, heat it up using propane, or not natural gas, heat it up, wash your clothes, and out the back door it goes. Well, this engineer came up with the idea, let's pass the outgoing cold water with the incoming cold water with the outgoing cold water. And our water temperature is 45 degrees coming from the wastewater plant, from the water plant, colder in the wintertime, warmer in the summertime. So they're heating that water up from 45 degrees to 94 degrees, free. Then they push that water over the top of their boilers and they heat it up from 94 degrees to 106 degrees, free. Free money, right, Adam? That's what industry's like about. So just a hot side note about that. So like I said, we had that oil and grease problem, and they put an oil skimmer, which isn't very effective, but it looks better. So there's an issue, and there's a solution. And that solution is up to the industry, right? They just have to meet our limits. So treatment was the solution to the first problem. NPE, the solution was product substitution. Bill, somebody asked about our surcharges. And we'd surcharge above 250 parts, and I don't know what their bills are. I don't suppose you know off the top of your head, Bill. It's a couple $1,000s a month. So when do you start saying, hey, stop giving us all this money and start treating your wastewater at your site? And some of the industries treat their own wastewater at their site. I think that's kind of up to the community. Now going back to local limits. Local limits are, as they imply, local. They're how your plant is operated, how your community is operated. We've got that river. Adam, do you have a big river that you discharge to? Yeah, so, if your river is small and your treatment plant is big, your discharge permit is going to be more stringent. Your industry's discharge permit is going to be more stringent. So all of you guys that are new, it was about 60% of the people that, when we asked who's new to this program, to pretreatment. So you guys, this might be the first time you heard about industrial laundry. And again, that's why we want to have these kind of presentations. So the NPE was a product substitution. Not much it can do for failure to sample and documentation and holding time, other than just talking to them. And most of these guys, you go out. We went to one guy one time, and they were giving us crude oil. And the guy that was the manager, he had no idea about the Clean Water Act and the Industrial Pretreatment Program, and he thought what he was doing was just the way you're supposed to do business. And he's like, I don't know any of these questions. It was this foreign concept. So you have to work with your industrial users and kind of educate them about your world and what their world was. The BTEC solution was outsourcing. First they had to identify it, and that was part of their response. The industrial users' response was, we have identified where these BTEC violations are coming from by looking at our customers, and now we're going to do a solution. And then the solids accumulation was the identification, or was the treatment of the wastewater. Now you remember that first picture I showed you of that sampler with the oil on it? This is exactly the same tubing with a brand new head on it. And after their treatment with their shaker screen, that strainer is clean. Well, I mean, it's just sand down there, so it's not much. Well, will the issues continue? Probably, but it might be a different issue. We don't know. Was the treatment sufficient? Maybe. We'll find out. The SIU actually asked me when I was talking to one of the guys, he said, when can we start resuming our chop towel washing? I said, well, we didn't tell you you had to stop. So I don't know. That hasn't been resolved. They haven't started yet, as far as I know. Bill, did they ever talk to you about that? Nope. So how much time we got, Adam? Am I on time? 14 minutes. Yeah. Well, we're a little